Just want to ask both of you very briefly, what made you arrive at this mission? And how is this coming from personal beliefs? Is it coming from collaborative research? And what does this mean to you?
Well, I think this is a personal belief that Bill and I have, that all lives do have equal value around the world. But as we looked out at what was going on around the world, and as we started to learn more about what was going on in Africa or India, we don't treat all lives as if they have equal value, and yet we should. Most people believe this, but yet we don't necessarily allocate resources as a world in this way. And so we felt like there was something that philanthropy and our foundation could do specifically to address this cause. And so it's become the mission of our foundation. It'll be our life's work.
All right. Okay, Bill, I want to ask you this. And this is mainly also because many people in India will not be so familiar with your path so far. You generated certain wealth and you decided to open a foundation to do good for society. You were an entrepreneur and now philanthropist. You could have perhaps maybe also opened another company which does good for society, like a renewable energy company, a pharma research company, and those would be a profit-making organization that could just be doing good and keep sustaining itself. Instead, you chose this direct, complete U-turn from entrepreneur path of this foundation. So did you go through that in your head that, hey, maybe I can fund a new corporation, or do you want to do this, or how did it all happen?
Microsoft had a chance by being at the very beginning of the computer revolution to have this huge impact. And for the philanthropy, I think we wanted to also have big impact, but kind of in a new dimension. And what we saw was that for the diseases and challenges affecting the poorest, that nobody was really bringing in the best scientists and the best measurement techniques. And so whether it was tuberculosis or malaria, and it wasn't clear who was supposed to step up, because for many of these, the disease had been solved in the rich world, so there was no market was going to emerge to incent the innovation, and yet the poor countries who had the problems weren't ever going to organize the capital and the scientific discovery process in a way that would get rid of these problems. So we saw something very unique. It's like when people ask me about Microsoft, they said, well, are you an entrepreneur? I said, no, I didn't think, oh, I'll start a company, what should I do? I fell in love with software, and it turns out if you want to get software out in the world, you build a company. So I started with the love of software first, and then saw, okay, how do you do that? Here it was this sense of innovation on behalf of the poorest, and building an institution that hired scientists and built partnerships. That turns out to be the way that we've gone about having that impact. And it's worked out incredibly well. But I didn't have any idea in the private field that would have had nearly the impact that the foundation has had.
I think it's also important to say that, right after Bill and I were engaged, well, even before that, we've been talking about the fact that the resources that had been amassed from Microsoft would go back to society. We made that commitment actually while we were engaged. And then we didn't know exactly how that was going to happen or what we were going to do. Bill used to say that he'd get to this philanthropy work when he was in his 60s. Clearly something's changed because he's still in his 50s. But we read an article about something called rotavirus in the New York Times, which is a diarrheal disease, killing over a million children. And we kind of were scratching our heads saying, how can that be? If a child in the United States gets a diarrheal disease, you go down to the drugstore and you get an off-the-shelf product. And why is it? What is the failure that's happened that allows so many children to die of that disease? And then it became a learning journey to learn about so many other diseases and learn what were childhood deaths, et cetera, that then led us to all the various places we've now gone with the foundation.
Okay. Which brings me to this, again, linked to that is this classic capitalist socialist argument, right? I wonder if you are able to classify yourself as one of those, but doesn't welfare create dependencies? Doesn't it get the government off the hook? Doesn't it, I've heard a lot of times your foundation does good work, but you hardly hear that Bill Gates Foundation did anything in India, but they've mobilized literally lakhs of workers, and I've heard there's the government often is allowed to take the credit. isn't it that welfare, I agree it's helping kids in the short term, helping people get medicines, but isn't long term, is not letting the government do their job or getting them off the hook here?
Well, first on capitalism versus socialism, the system that works is largely a capitalistic system. And no one really believes in 100% capitalistic. You can't run a police force or a judiciary capitalistically. And even in domains that you can run capitalistic, like food, you need food standards, you need laws to make sure the pricing is done in a fair way. And you need to fund research that the private sector will tend not to do, the basic research that actually has driven a lot of the advances forward. And so you want the market to extend pretty far. Different countries draw the boundary differently. The more socialistic things are, the less you get this incentive system and measurement system that works very well. And there's certainly some areas where India still has a history of more socialistic approaches that will, over time, have to be unchanged to unleash all the kind of innovation. The area we work in, primary health care, isn't a market. That is making sure every kid has vaccines, making sure delivery services are available for women. The government's got to make sure those are offered. Now, you could outsource it to NGOs or even for-profit companies, but by and large, the government's chosen to do it itself. Part of the reason we don't want to take credit for something is that in basically all of our programs, we're a partner with the government, or actually our partners are partners with the government, helping them get smarter faster. How do they train people? What tools should they use? How do they absolutely take the best practices from other parts of the country, other parts of the world, and apply those? And in the long run, the basic responsibility for making sure every child gets vaccines or safe delivery, that's with the government. And if we've been able to be in there and help them do that with high quality and high efficiency, the dream and the belief is that that will stick and that then we can move on and work on something else. So the real responsibility and credit stays with them, even if we've been part of the acceleration to get it into the right form.
I think the other thing to understand is how we think a little bit about philanthropy. We think about philanthropy that all it can do is be a catalytic wedge. It can show the points of light, it can work with partners, it can measure things, it can do innovations, but ultimately it's up to a government to scale it up. We don't begin to have enough money to scale at the level it needs just in one state in India. So that's how we think about philanthropy. And the other thing is, everything that we're doing is about really unleashing the potential of individuals. So getting people on this healthy path in life, a child with the right vaccines, the right nutrition, a mother not dying in childbirth, so that they can get on a healthy path and ultimately get an education and ultimately get a job and be a part of the economic engine of society. We believe in that human potential, but sometimes because of the failures of capitalism, the right things don't happen for that individual, or they don't even get the right tools in their hand, like a vaccine. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to unleash that individual's capabilities so that they can thrive.
Okay. And both of you visited India many times in the past decade, and now we have seen a change in government. There's Mr. Modi, who's in power. Broadly, do you think it's a progressive agenda? Do you see hope? Do you see it's really something that could change things in India?
We're very enthused about the government that's come to power. I think in a couple of areas specifically that we work in health. For instance, the fact that they came out right away and said that they're going to roll out 4 key new vaccines across India. That's absolutely huge. I mean, that'll bring down childhood death. Childhood death has been coming, the under 5 death has been coming down since 1990. Used to be 12 children died out of every 100 born. Now we're down to 5 children dying out of every 100 born. But if you want to still get that 1.4 million children that die every year, you've got to roll out these key vaccines. And some of them are very specific to India, like Japanese encephalitis. So we see that. We see the commitment to newborn health, the fact that half the children that die are newborns, huge commitment to that, huge commitment to getting out sanitation, which again will ultimately bring down diarrheal diseases and also make sure then people get the right nutrition to grow up again healthy and be able to contribute and be part of society and in school. So just those three things alone, and there's a whole host more, we're really excited about.
Yeah, so I'd say that's a very positive part of the report card. I'd say there's a few things that are still unclear. When push comes to shove, the health budget is going to have to go up. And so in years where this government really gets to figure out that fiscal balance, it'll be interesting to see if that's going up. I also think for the economy as a whole, there's some unpopular things that need to be done. And the real test of a government is, are they willing to do things that are good for the country, which the kind of common sense thinking doesn't immediately embrace. What good is a mandate if it's not to do some unpopular things? So I'd say in terms of the budget and certain reform things, it'll be interesting to see that those things aren't clear yet. In terms of our particular priorities, some great goals have been set, and we're very enthused. Whether we can now steer that to actual execution, the quality of this annotation, does it get used? The quality of the bank accounts, do they get used? There's a lot to be done there.
Okay, here's the question. Foreign foundations, sometimes they come under the scanner in India. There's sections of people, and your foundation has never been targeted, but there are foundations, even the World Bank is not spared, that here's all this foreign money coming, and they have an agenda. They have a Western, capitalist, evil agenda to take over India all over again. It can get as loony as that, and you can clearly see I don't subscribe to those theories. But when you're doing all this work and giving away your money and working hard at it, I mean, it is nice. I'm sure you expect, like, okay, even if you don't say thank you, it would be nice to say thank you. People are actually attacking your motives and intentions. What's your rational answer to these? And emotionally, does it hurt you at some level when you are questioned, hey, what are you doing here?
Well, I don't think it hurts us. When somebody says, okay, vaccines are bad, or instead of talking about the kids who don't get vaccines, they say, have we proven that 1 out of 1 million kids isn't affected, and they raise doubts about that. The fact that there are vaccines that aren't here in India, that are in Bangladesh, they're in Pakistan, they're in most of Africa, you can definitely get impatient that the general sensitivities about, hey, what are we missing here? Shouldn't we do this thing? That can be a bit frustrating. The FCRA approval process is fairly long, not an easy thing to get through, but we're okay with that. We've mostly worked with experts as opposed to, wanting to have some broad recognition. And so much of what we're doing is just helping the government do things that it's clearly committed to. We sometimes think of ourselves more at a technical level, of how you save lives. Yeah, there's policy decisions about saving lives, but that's all, just what's the most cost-effective way. The general idea that it's worthwhile, budget should be allocated to it, that gets decided at the political level.
Yeah, simply as a human being, does it get too much for you sometimes? Have there been times that you come back and, especially you've been born in America, land of affluence, and then you see so much suffering, you can't sleep at night. I mean, you've chosen to take a path of life where you see suffering on a daily basis. And does it have a toll somewhere? Or can you give an example where you were so moved that you just overwhelmed and forgot about the foundation and just as a human being couldn't take it?
Sure. I mean, you see unbelievable things. I mean, you here in the slums in Delhi, when you're out in a slum or when you're out in the rural area, they're also what move you to action and to say, I've got to do something globally, not just for that one woman. I'll give you one example from when I was in UP actually years ago. I was out meeting, I was walking through a village and stopped by a woman's house, And she just knew I was a Western woman there. She didn't know who I was, where exactly I was from in the West. She begged me to take her child home with her. And she not only begged me to take one child home, she begged me to take 2 children home. And what she said to me is, can't you see I have nothing? My husband's hurt, he'd been injured on his job, and he was there laying on a mat. She says, we have no land, we have nothing, and I have 5 children. I can't feed these children. Will you take 2 home? That's heartbreaking, right? I mean, absolutely heartbreaking. And you'd like to take that child home. But what it spurs you on to do is to say, how many families are in that situation, and what can we do on a much larger scale to help lift people out of that abject poverty so that they're not asking you to take their children home? No mother ever wants to be in that situation.
Yeah, I think the 2 most tough emotionally times I've had doing work for the foundation were both here in India, and they had to do with this effort called Avahan, which was about reducing HIV infection. And it was decided by the foundation team here that in order to do that, you had to create communities for the sex workers where they could come and talk to each other and share stories and, figure out how to stop police exploitation and violence and so many awful things that they have to put up with. And so we'd gather the members of these communities together and sit, and they would just go around and tell their stories. One woman talked about her child who was ashamed of her mother who'd committed suicide, and it was the most horrific tale I've ever heard. That there were several very tough ones, and just to listen what it was like, how people ended up in the situation, what their hopes were, how they were still, wanting to get on with life and do good things. That was, very, very touching, very real.
And those stories don't ever leave you. They kind of haunt you, and you try not to forget them because they're what spur you on to do the work day in and day out.
Yeah.